a lot of the girls I talked to in high school and college are like running clubs or organizations, building all these things, but they don't necessarily see a career. They didn't know of a career that like in tech industry for them. And so I think that's something really powerful about product management. And I hope, hopefully more people learn more about it.
Welcome to the Craft podcast / Clubhouse show with Veronica and John. We chose the name Craft because craft opens up so much opportunities. I think that if people learn more craft, a trade, anything, and just learn how to do something more, we can help make the world a better place, even though that sounds corny.
Absolutely. It's a little bit of helping people who already are performers of the craft hone their craft. And it's also about helping people who might want to learn more about it or break into a new industry. Today, we are excited to be talking craft with our guest, Aleena Byrne. These days, Aleena is a senior product manager at Nuro, but she is no stranger to product management. She's also done it at Facebook and at Riot Games. And we're so excited to dive in deep with you today, Aleena. Thanks for joining
of course.
us.
Really excited to talk more about PM.
Speaking of PM, let's start off with that, because we've worked at many companies together and just companies we were not together at. And the word PM is used in so many ways. So here's my list of titles that use PM or some version of product management. So there's TPM, technical program manager, there's project manager, there's program manager, there's dev managers. I don't know if you've heard of anything else beyond that, but how is product management different from all of those other fields or disciplines?
Yeah, I think there's honestly quite a lot of overlap, between like TPM, project manager, program manager. I think all of them, the high level intent of the role is trying to, align a team working cross-functionally with a group of different people toward a common goal. I think maybe some of the differences that you can see in what typically is called product management is a growing newer area in terms of its application and usage. A lot more companies have product managers than I think they had in the past. And I think what's also special about product management is you're focused on the why and the goals and what you build to achieve those goals, but you're not necessarily the leader of execution. That's typically where you see a technical program manager, project managers, program managers, and dev managers come in. They're typically a little bit more focused on execution. They might have a deeper skill set and with more technical background and able to communicate and work out, the intricacies that to execute on a project. But the product manager really helps serve in, setting the direction for the product.
Awesome, thank you.
Can I ask, before we dig in more about what that actually means for your day-to-day life, how did you get started as a PM? I'm assuming that you weren't like a small child who dreamed of becoming a product manager when they grow up. Sort of, how did this all start for you?
Yeah, I don't think anyone dreams of being a PM. Maybe these days. I had no idea like what product management was until college. But actually, kind of my origin story for product management started way before I knew anything about it. In high school, me and my best friend, who was like basically like a graphics designer, kind of like learning how to do graphic design. We really, really loved K-pop music. Like we were totally obsessed with it. And back then, K-pop, like, I don't know how cool K-pop music really is today, but it was definitely not cool then. But we were just totally obsessed with it. We, went on like the online forums and followed them all on social media. And when we were about 13 or 14, we actually just kind of had like a boring summer where we decided like, oh, let's just try like making something. And we tried selling like cell phone charms or like sewing hats. Like they did not work out. Physically, they did not manifest. But what ended up resonating was actually K-pop t-shirt designs. My friend was like, she did all the designs. I'd never touched design work, but she kind of came up with these designs and I figured out how to sell them on like some random website. And eventually we actually grew it into a pretty legitimate business. To the point, like we actually covered for us to both go to college, like all of our expenses. Our parents they're very happy with it. And throughout the whole experience, it was just so exciting because I didn't work on the design side so much, but I got to like do web development. I built out like our website in a horrible, horrible way. I hacked something together, even though I had no coding experience. I had to like work with our supplier and vendor. I would call them and like pretend to be like above 18 years old and try to like negotiate getting deals. And just all that kind of together, like I was like, oh, this is like definitely what I should do. And then I went to college and majored in biomedical engineering. So I had a little bit of a pivot and I was like, oh wait, this is definitely not where I want to go. And then I ended up saying, hey, like what do I actually want to do? And I actually found out product management is the manifestation of all that entrepreneurial kind of spirit that I had in high school, but in a format that is a little bit less risky than starting my own company.
I think that's a great point because I'm not sure. I have not seen like a major US university have like a degree in product management, right? It's really more of a series of skill sets. And I feel the same way as you. Even though I had the PM title in certain roles, I feel like I learned more about PM sometimes in some of my side projects. And usually, in my case, it was the same story as you. It's like learning how to build a static website. And then I nerded out into it and I started, I wrote like an AWS white paper on how to like host a static website. That is not complex. This is not like, blockchain or anything, but I was like so happy and proud that like I knew how to build this like simple little thing. So let's talk about, our show is about craft, right? And I think, tell me more about the PM craft. What are some of the things you're trying to achieve day to day?
Yes, like I mentioned, the PM's primary focus is figuring out the why and kind of the general direction and setting kind of the goals for the team. That said, I think in reality, a PM is involved in the whole end-to-end, product development process for software, for hardware, depending on what they're focusing on. And so to be honest, a lot of my day-to-day is jumping between figuring out that higher level, longer term vision, organizing goals for teams of teams, just finding metrics, success KPIs, working on like, is this program or a product that we're developing, financially going to be successful? Could it be profitable? Like really long-term questions. And at the same time, then jumping like 100 times throughout the day into like little day-to-day tasks that comes up, an engineer's blocked. How can you sort through these typically misalignment issues? I think a lot of what a PM's job is aligning different groups of people toward a common goal and then resolving misalignment and not pushing for what they want necessarily, but making sure that the company and the groups and the teams are moving toward a common purpose.
Great, thank you.
Like being a soup to nuts business manager in a similar way, where you have to be sort of charting the course for the long-term vision at the same time that you're putting out fires. I hate that phrase, putting out fires, but I haven't come up with a better one. When I think of PMs, I often think of organization, and that you're the ultimate organizer. And I know that, getting everyone on a common framework is key to achieving that alignment that you're talking about. Can you speak to some of the like big picture frameworks or sort of tools that are most relevant to you in your day-to-day?
Yeah, and this is actually an interesting area because when I was a pretty junior PM, I remember people pointing out like the next level of PM is using frameworks. And I honestly didn't know what they meant for the longest period of time until one day I was like, oh, it's just a template or a structure or a picture, like a visual. And there's actually a moment where I kind of, in some ways, view like, oh, frameworks are just kind of like some BS-y thing that you're just kind of selling something or you're just putting it together to like show off you're a cool PM. But then I realized, oh wait, no, the whole point about it is like quickly, articulately communicating your purpose and convincing people. And I actually think that for the most part, PMs don't need super specialized, they don't need super specialized frameworks or templates. Pretty common ones that you're doing is like setting vision setting, goal setting, determining your KPIs and your metrics. Commonly you do like a PRD, a product requirements document format. You may work with a user researcher or do your own user research and might do study design. But I think altogether, I don't think I have any special magic here. I sometimes literally just Googled like a certain problem and added framework on the end and then gone to Google Images to look at like how people organize their thoughts. And like recently I was just Googling, outsourcing versus developing something in-house because I have my own personal, I kind of can tell for this problem. I have my own personal way of thinking about it, or I have a reason why I'm leaning toward one side, but how can I organize my thoughts more concretely? And it turns out a lot of people have done that much on that topic, much more than I have. One framework that I have used a lot that maybe isn't super obvious is decision or prioritization matrices. I think pros and cons lists are very, very common, but I think this is a specific type of framework that is really effective for PMs in not only their day-to-day work, but like even personal life. But interviews format is like one of the most diverse areas. It's the most flexible. And yeah, the basic summary of it is it's just a two-dimensional matrix where you put options as rows and then factors you care about as columns. And I found that has helped me work through some really difficult decisions, especially where stakeholders are misaligned, where team members are kind of getting fired up about something because they feel very passionate about their solution or their objective. But when you're able to put it into a visual and you take it away from them fighting as people, they're kind of fighting against the prioritization matrix. I found it really effective.
All right, you triangulate the problem. It's not me versus you. It's both of us trying to interpret this abstract thing that we've all agreed on.
Yeah, someone's even told me like literally physically put it on a wall, so they're yelling at a wall and not at each other sometimes. So I found that like, yeah, you know, in the normal days, being able to whiteboard it up and be like, hey, you solved this problem. Look at this wall. Don't look at each other and argue about, you know, just what you want to do.
And this is kind of a tangent, forgive me, John, but it's sort of when you were talking about frameworks and visuals and whiteboarding, it does make me wonder, you know, in your experience, has it been different during the pandemic, or are visuals even more important for aligning people when we're all just zooming in? Or
no one's figured out online whiteboarding fully, right? Like there's nothing quite like that unless your company buys you all iPads and you can draw. There's something so tactile and great about the flexibility of a whiteboard. And I really do. That's one thing I miss almost on a day-to-day level, because you can't do that. Like, hey, let's take this argument people are having, let's put it on the whiteboard, let's document it. It's all just very typed and very formal. And so I think that is one part I really, really miss of just product development processes. But I think in general, almost everything else, it is pretty doable online, but whiteboarding is just something I definitely miss personally.
It's pretty amazing that you have a beautiful whiteboard in your background.
I do. I know. I literally, every time I walk into the room I'm in, I'm like, oh my God, I miss you. I just need the rest of my team here to actually do something with it.
I actually got a whiteboard as well, just for the sake of interviews. I think it was like for a PM interview. Because, you know, like, why not? And the PMs are really expected to use whiteboards. I miss whiteboards, and I love your idea about the having like a decision matrix, or have someone argue with the framework. I love that idea. But one thing I want to push back on a bit is, you know, you talked about there's nothing magic, which, you know, about being a PM in the sense of you're talking about the organizing and the alignment. I think that's largely true. There are lots of people who are, you know, organized and good like project management skills, but I do think
She's
alignment.
Also being humble.
No, exactly. But I think alignment is sometimes like pretty hard too. Like you have to be like empathetic and know and really just get like credibility where people even want to listen to you, right? But there is one part of being a PM that I do think some people may say it's a little bit like magic, because some people just have more of it than others. And I think that is product sense. So what do you think about that word?
Yeah, I mean, when I hear product sense, I think of the Facebook interview, because that's literally what it's called. And that's probably the first time I ever heard of it. But no, I think you're right. There is something special. And, you know, recently, we hired a new person who joined my team, and there definitely is something that resonates, even though the person doesn't know the frameworks, doesn't have necessarily the structure on organizing yet, because they haven't been in a role like PM before, but there is something on how they talk or how to analyze problems that just does resonate. And I think what a really great, you know, PM or hiring managers, and I think companies like Facebook and Google are starting to do, is they're actually intentionally trying to find people who have great product sense, but not necessarily have learned the PM framing or words yet. So those are the APM and RPM programs. And I think that's like a really smart talent, like a really smart talent pool that they're accessing. And everyone I've met that's been in the program has been like, you can tell when you meet them, like, oh, this is going to be like a superstar PM. They're going to be leading this company like in just a short amount of time. And I think those big companies are really tapping into how to analyze and assess product sense in a, you know, pretty structured approach.
Is there a standard definition at Facebook for product sense, or
I can't remember if there is one. I mean, the interview format for product sense is you're basically given an ambiguous area, an ambiguous goal. What would you do? And I think, and it's basically a case interview. You're walking through, hey, with this topic, how would I approach it? What would I consider? I always do decision matrix, like literally I'll whiteboard a decision matrix up every time. And I think the interviewer is typically pushing back on you and really seeing how you think, how you structure your information, but then how do you really respond to these challenges and questions, and how are you inquisitive, or are you considering the users by default? But do you also consider constraints as well? And I think, yeah, there is something special there. And to be honest, I don't really know where I got it from necessarily. Like I thought it was from practice. But when I do meet people, sometimes you can feel that like raw talent in that.
Well, you clearly had something, at age 13, you're developing your own business that paid for your whole college education. Like, if I don't know, do you still wear those shirts, by the way?
It's funny because when we were even in high school, we kind of thought our designs were a little embarrassing. So my friend would design shirts for us two to wear, but we didn't wear like the ones we sold very much.
Hey,
but it worked. We knew our market though very well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all about user. Well, I'm all about the hot goss and the hot gossip. And I was just wondering if there are any, sort of hot topics that are hotly debated topics among PMs. Something that I hear a little bit about is the relationship between engineers and PMs.
Yeah, engineers don't always love PMs. I think especially.
And why is that?
I kind of get it. So I originally was a computer science, or I majored in computer science. My entire plan in college was to go to, I don't know, try to get an engineering job at Amazon or Google or something, and then switch into product management after like 2 or 3 years. And so when I ended up becoming a PM, I had a little bit more of that connection with engineers, especially newer grad engineers. And I think for the most part, a lot of people they can work with really bad PMs, depending on what company they're at. And I think we talked about what's good about a PM, but like what's bad about, what are the typical like poor traits of a bad PM? I think it's typically like ego-based, or unable to like, separate their own personal preferences or ideas. And they just kind of are pushing through their way. And I think a lot of engineers meet these people because traditionally that type of personality can be rewarded at a lot of companies. And so you're going to interact with more and more of these PMs who have that kind of arrogant energy. And then over time, you're not going to enjoy working with PMs. You're going to see them as someone who, sets up unrealistic deadlines for you, that maybe doesn't show up to any meetings. A lot of times engineers say, oh, PM doesn't do any work. So I think it's kind of a lot. I've even seen to some point PMs are a negative aspect on the team. I'd rather there was like the absence of this person entirely. So I think, engineers definitely have a lot of opinions, and it's always a pleasure when you work with an engineer, or it's like a pleasure, and then you also feel bad for them when you work with an engineer and they say, oh, you're the best PM I've ever worked with, because you're like, oh no, what have you seen? And it's usually ego that I think is the main issue.
Great.
Interesting.
Okay. Let's take a little quick different angle of questioning, which is history of PM. And I know it's a complicated topic. I mean, we were Googling this a couple nights ago, like, what is the history of product management? And some people are like, oh, it started off in like marketing or selling consumer packaged goods. But ultimately, I think today PM is a title that is pretty coveted. I know that, whether it's at Amazon or, the big tech firms that we've all heard of or known, people want to either get that role, or if they were from a different team, or a different discipline, they want to switch to it. So let's talk a little bit about what is modern product management, and in your opinion, when did this really start? And what does it mean?
Personally, I don't know a ton on when it started, but I think you can definitely see how Fang changed it, or maybe popularized it. My personal guess, without doing too much research, is that the Fang companies were, they had PMs early on. There are companies, maybe except Amazon, that highly paid and highly rewarded all of their employees, including PMs. And I think over time, people started recognizing, oh, these companies are doing really well. And that role, I don't have to be like a full software engineer, and I can actually earn a pretty great comparable salary. And that's, pretty exciting. And it's also these big leadership roles of the company. I think a lot of, I don't know, Steve Jobs is maybe above a PM, I guess, but there's a lot of aspects about him that are very PM-like, more of the asshole PM type. But there are some aspects of him that are very PM. And I think even some of the early Google and Yahoo, there's leaders, tech leaders, who are known for kind of encompassing what a PM is. And I think that really started resonating with people. And I really do think that Facebook and Google have really popularized it and expanded it quite a bit.
Well, and you
And
touched on something big, it seems like, which is whether or not you need to have an engineering background in order to do the role. And maybe historically, more people did come from that area versus now it's open to a more diversity of backgrounds.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, one major thing that's changed in the time I was trying to be a PM in college, is that I did coding interviews when I interviewed at Google and Microsoft, trying to become a product manager. I mean, they weren't the hardest coding interviews. They're nothing like the software engineering interviews, but they were coding interviews. And actually, Facebook, I think, is one of, or probably the first big, high level tech company that didn't require a coding interview for PMs. And it was with intentionality. After I joined Facebook, I learned that there were product marketing manager. Oh, that's another PM type, product marketing managers who were trying to transfer into PM, but they had to go and take coding classes to do the interview. And then once they, became a PM, they're like, wait, I didn't need to know any of that at all. It kind of helped, but Facebook actually intentionally changed it because it was limiting their hiring pool quite a bit. You're traditionally only going to hire people with engineering backgrounds. Well, then you're limiting to a pretty small pool that isn't very diverse and isn't very representative of the audience that Facebook, the customers that Facebook has, the amount of people it reaches. You're basically just pulling from the software engineering pool with a coding interview requirement.
And to follow up on your whole, when did this whole PM shift happen? I don't know the exact year, but my story is, and also we didn't talk about how maybe engineers not only don't like PMs, but sometimes they don't like MBAs too. They definitely don't like MBAs, so they probably really hate MBA PMs.
Oh yeah, that has to be the worst. That's the worst.
That's the worst combo.
Yeah.
That's the worst combo,
Definitely.
and I have to really, I had to really suffer for being that. But in 2013, when I was in business school, I was looking for summer PM internships, and honestly, I think you were spot on. I think only like Google and Amazon were accepting non-technical. Facebook and Amazon were even considering non-technical PMs to be interviewed. Google literally said you need a CS degree or background, and I didn't really check Microsoft.
Microsoft did at the time. Yeah,
Oh,
I had
okay,
to
they
do
did
it.
too.
So yeah.
Some of and then actually, luckily, that's how I got into gaming. I think gaming, gaming is also software development, but they're a little bit more lax, and I was able to score a summer internship at Riot Games without having to do a coding interview, or even nothing like a serious now I'll call traditional like a Facebook PM interview, which I went through as well. I think the Riot one was just more like general, like, do you like
Riot's
games?
more, because Riot's a little more producer, has a little more of that producer energy, a little more creative game development, game design. So I think that was kind of you had to have that. That was their equivalent of the coding interview.
No, that's a great
point. You had to be a gamer. So
that's a great point. We didn't even talk about that because that's a whole different slice of it, which is the whole producer, the producer role, which is super not nebulous, but it's used in entertainment in different ways too. So
right, if you're talking about PM sort of being a different way of looking at owning your own business or running something soup to nuts, an executive producer or producer is also someone responsible for overseeing the success of the project in the same way. But you're saying like more of a creative development aspect when you were in the gaming space.
I mean, I honestly think, like I said, I think most of the titles are pretty, there's still a lot of overlap between the roles. I think they have a high level purpose, but they just manifest differently in the industry. And then maybe when the job kind of came about, what industry was hot when that job came about. Yeah, so like producer, very, very big in creative industry, including video gaming. But there's still product managers actually at video game companies, but you'll typically see them more on like live service games where they're building a more traditional product as opposed to like launching a video game that gets released into stores and they work on the next version of the video game.
Totally. That was all the questions I have, Veronica. If I was going to check in with you before we started, seeing if we could get some, or if there were any questions from the audience.
Well, I did just want to touch on one last thing when you were talking about, increasing diversity among PMs and, opening it up to different kinds of backgrounds. I wonder, do you see a lot of women PMs around you, or do you feel like there are more PMs these days than there were, say, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I wasn't a PM 10 years ago. I was still in college, but yeah, probably this is the start. It's a bit hard because I have switched, companies quite a bit. But I think I definitely, it is surprising actually how few female PMs there are. Kind of just, the domain actually, the traditional, like the very traditional stereotypical qualities of a PM actually tend to line up with the traditional stereotypical qualities of product managers or of women, women's product managers, like they have that shared foundation. So it actually is, to me, pretty surprising, when I started, that there were so few women. And I do think a lot of it was because of that hard technical requirement set by those companies earlier in the day that, everyone looked up to Google, Facebook, Amazon. And so they replicated that in their own interview process and systems. But I do think with Facebook, being one of the first companies I saw get rid of that coding interview and make an active effort to look for more diverse PMs and look for that like raw creative, that raw product sense talent, that user empathy. I think Facebook has actually set the course for pretty diverse recruiting of PMs and really developing PMs who may not have ever, like amazing PMs who may have never gone into the field otherwise. And the good thing is other companies, I think, are starting to copy them. So at my job now at Nuro, I did not do a coding interview. I wouldn't even accept a coding interview at this point because it's just not like it's so infrequently required. And I think when I talk to, a lot of students and college students or even high schoolers, they often ask, that's like the first question, oh, like, I don't want to be an engineer. Do I have to be an engineer? Do I have to major in engineering? I'm like, not really. Like, I think this is a totally open field and you can see them get excited because so many aspects of product management resonate with them. Like a lot of the girls I talked to in high school and college are like running clubs or organizations, building all these things, but they don't necessarily see a career. They didn't know of a career that like in tech industry for them. And so I think that's something really powerful about product management. And I hope, hopefully more people learn more about it.
Definitely, it's a leadership position, get your leadership skills on.
Definitely.
Well, I have more questions that I could ask you, but I think it would be more fun is to open it up and see if there's anybody else who has burning questions.